There are high levels of lead and cadmium in most of the protein supplements you consume. Those were the conclusions of the latest consumers reports. Many of you have written to me in recent weeks, worried and with good reason. Dr. Borja Bandera, should I stop using my protein supplements? What actual risks do they pose? Today you will have maximum clarity about the magnitude, consequences, and implications of these findings. In 12 minutes, you will know if consuming protein supplements long-term is dangerous because of their heavy metal content, or if, on the contrary, it is a safe or even beneficial practice. Let's begin. First, answer yourself. What are the negative health effects of excessive exposure to lead? Lead is a heavy metal that bioaccumulates, just like mercury, cadmium, or arsenic. If I mention heavy metals, you probably think of tuna because of its mercury content. When you eat a large fish, you also consume the mercury that's built up in its fat over time. Because the sea is polluted, tuna have long been ingesting mercury due to their long lifespan, large size, weight, and high fat content. The main problem is that once these molecules accumulate in our bodies, we're very inefficient at excreting them. When lead is absorbed, it travels in the blood and settles in soft tissues such as the kidneys, brain, and liver. It also accumulates in fat, mimics calcium, and integrates into the bone. There, lead can remain for an average of 20 to 30 years. And the main proven clinical risks are neurotoxicity when it crosses the blood-brain barrier. The greatest cardiovascular risk, mainly high blood pressure, which is often resistant to medication, but it also damages the kidney, can cause anemia or endocrine disruption. But of course, for any of these problems to occur, you need sufficient exposure over a long enough period of time. And here's the crux of the matter. Are we ingesting it? Are you ingesting too much lead? I'm going to explain it to you. What you're about to see is exactly that. How much lead do I find in protein supplements? Is that a lot or a little? Am I at serious risk? Alright, if we ask ourselves what is considered excessive exposure to lead, each regulatory agency proposes different maximum daily intake limits based on the fact that there is no safe level of lead intake. These limits greatly reduce risk but don't guarantee zero risk. Well, European Food Safety Authority proposes a theoretical limit that would worsen cardiovascular or kidney health at 1.5 and 0.63 micrograms per kilogram of body weight per day, respectively. Remember these important numbers. The general limit that European Food Safety Authority recommends not to exceed is 0.35 micrograms per kilogram per day. A 100 kilogram man would be advised not to exceed 35 micrograms per day. The American Food and Drug Administration sets the cutoff at 12.5 micrograms per day for adult men and 8 micrograms per day for women of childbearing age. Why? Well, because in children, lead is even more problematic. However, recent studies suggest that this limit might not be sufficiently protective. We have what's called California Proposition 65, which is the one used in Consumer Reports, the report we're talking about today, and it is by far the most conservative. It sets the limit at 0.5 micrograms per day. It's the lowest limit, and it's ridiculously low. I'll explain why. In fact, what Proposition 65 has done is look at what amount of lead, what exposure to lead theoretically causes any harm to health. The minimum that could cause some theoretical harm out of 1,000, okay? So the safety margin is huge, it's enormous. For children, the tolerable limit is lower at 2 micrograms per day according to the Food and Drug Administration. Given this, what does the new Consumer Reports report cover? First, what is Consumer Report? It's the leading and most influential consumer group in the United States. It's an independent nonprofit that recently studied this topic. Can we consider it the referee of consumer affairs in the United States? They don't accept ads, are funded by reader subscriptions and donations, and purchase all products they analyze. They don't accept free samples. It's kind of like a product review organization, and it's great. Well, they studied the heavy metal content in different brands of protein, and surprise, more than 2/3 of the products analyzed had lead levels in a single serving that exceeded the recommended maximum for a day. Some had 10 times more. That is, widespread contamination was found in protein products. The authors of the report also pointed out that since it's a product consumed daily, of course, this routine can make protein problematic, right? Even Ensure, which is used in clinical nutrition in hospitals around the world, has scored above the maximum safe daily levels. Other classic brands like Optimum Nutrition or Muscle Tech come out pretty well. But some interesting patterns were seen in this report, which I will now analyze. The consumer report's main finding is that plant-based protein is the most contaminated, sometimes containing up to 9 times more lead than whey protein. Pea protein was especially bad. Remember, where do lead and other heavy metals come from? From contaminated soil, right? Well, that's how plants end up absorbing them. Most vegan proteins are made from water, rice, pea, soy, or chickpea. You may recall the warning about brown rice, which can contain 0.1 to 0.2 milligrams of inorganic arsenic per kilo. You might wonder why whey protein is safer in this regard. Think about it. Whey protein has lower amounts because there are several filters or barriers between the contaminated soil and the final product. Whey comes from milk. The cow, which eats plants, has a liver and kidneys. Don't these xenobiotics get filtered and bioaccumulated? Not much of it passes into the milk. Further ultra-processing milk into whey isolate or concentrate lowers the levels even more. So, should I panic and stop consuming any protein supplement? Are the levels found truly dangerous? That's what I'm about to explain. Companies like Huel have issued responses to this report because imagine the damage something like this can do. They argue that their products are safe and that the detected levels are within the strict limits of international food safety standards. I'll share Huel's response since it's excellent. And yes, it's true because the safety limits used by Proposition 65 and Consumer Reports are extremely low, over 10 times lower than the Food and Drug Administration's, for example. In fact, there are foods like leafy greens, nuts, and legumes that have a higher amount of lead than some protein supplements analyzed by weight. I especially like this infographic made by Huel de Bajo. It says something like, when a lab detects a couple of micrograms in a serving of Huel, that's not contamination, it's simply how cultivated food behaves. In other words, to put it another way, the soils are generally contaminated, and in some foods there are heavy metals. And we can't avoid this, alright? What we can do is try to minimize that exposure, which is what I'm going to teach you at the end of the video. What does Huel mean by this? Well, it means that the soil is contaminated, that we can't do much to avoid this, and that we can find lead even more than what was found in Huel, found in green leaves, sweet potatoes, seeds, and nuts, with little we can do about it. If we can't avoid heavy metals because of widespread contamination, it's worth asking how much more we ingest now compared to the past. And here comes the good news. Evidence shows exposure to iron, lead, cadmium, or arsenic in Europe and North America has decreased by up to 95%. Over the past 50 years, you may ask why. Environmental regulations, reduced lead in fuels, better industrial control, and similar measures. However, metals like nickel, chromium, and cadmium have increased in cities, rising up to 10 to 16 times over the past 70 years. And the main sources, well, they are still diet and smoking. So overall, you can rest easy. The exposure of your cells to lead and other heavy metals thanks to regulatory efforts is getting lower and lower. The amount of lead in protein supplements remains very low, and it's highly unlikely that it would cause you toxicity that would lead to a deterioration in your health unless you base your diet on these products. That's unlikely and equally applicable to other contaminated foods, as we've seen that they're perfectly healthy. But, as always, you can further minimize the risk by following some very simple guidelines, which I'll share with you next. First, though, did you see that choosing whey protein over more contaminated plant-based options? In this case, if we look only at the lead content, then it's better. The lead content is almost 10 times lower in whey. Second, choose those without sweeteners and without cocoa, since these are the ones that have the most heavy metals. In fact, it's the cocoa that provides the largest amount of that lead. An example would be the one I always recommend, which is the native isolate from full gas, a protein, as I said, very plain, without sweeteners, neutral flavor, but it works wonderfully. Now, if you want to minimize the risk even further, I also think that's logical given what we've studied. So, put protein supplementation for pregnant women and children in the background, since their safety margin is much lower. In fact, the report names the worst offenders with first and last names, specifically the vegan mass gainer from Naked Nutrition and the Los Angeles Whale Black Edition. It's up to you whether to use them or not, but I'm telling you, those claims are pretty exaggerated. Another guideline: get most of your protein from food, not supplements. This makes sense. If you regularly and consistently don't meet your requirements, something is going on, something that needs your attention. You may need to change your routine, your appetite might have dropped, or you could have overestimated your needs, which is common. And if you want to take caution to the extreme, you can see the protein supplement as a tool for those days when your diet doesn't meet your optimal requirements, but not to consume it daily. I usually don't recommend products that replace a full meal except in specific clinical cases. I can make a video about this if you want. In short, seek transparency and third-party testing. With all this information understood, I encourage you, since zero risk and zero exposure are impossible in the world we live in. Your liver, kidneys, cardiovascular, and lymphatic systems should be strong and healthy for effective detoxification. To achieve this, you just need to optimize your health as much as possible, which is what we teach on this channel. I hope this information has reassured you and been useful to you. If so, let me know in the comments. See you in the next video. Big hug, keep empowering yourself.